Hi everyone, welcome to AccA F6 UK lectures. In this video we are going to look at chapter number 2, which is on UK residence. Now in the previous lecture, in the first chapter, we looked at the income tax pro forma. Now why we make the income tax pro forma? Because we have some sources of income like property income, dividend income or interest income or employment income. So I can earn the income from many different sources. Now when I'm earning the income, of course government has got some share in it. So government will collect the tax from the sources of income which I am earning the income. Now the income which I am earning, of course the government is going to charge something on it. The thing which they are going to charge is called taxation, right? Now for example, if I'm living in Canada, say for example, or if I'm living in US, United States, will I have to pay any tax in the UK? I am earning income in US, will I have to pay tax in UK? No, of course not. Now when you are living in a country, whichever country you are living in, you are subject to paying tax in that specific country, right? So as far as this paper is concerned, F6 taxation, as we know, it is a UK taxation. So the people who are living in the UK, only those people are liable to pay UK tax. Alright, not the people who are living in India, not the people who are living in Canada or US or wherever. They don't have to pay UK tax. Only people who are living in the UK will have to pay UK tax. Alright, now we have to determine in this chapter, that's why the chapter name is residence. If you look at your chapter in the lecture notes, chapter number 2 is residence. Now resident simply means that who is resident in the UK, who is living in the UK. Excuse me. Now resident does not mean that someone who came on a visit, on a temporary visit of say for example 1 week. If you came to UK for a week or couple of weeks just on a visit, then it will not be considered as residence. Of course you came on visit, so in them cases you will not have to pay any tax. But there are some detailed rules on UK residents, so we will look at the rules now. So residents, first of all I've written down that only UK residents will pay UK tax. So as I explained earlier, that if you are not UK resident, you will not have to pay any UK tax. Alright? Now I've highlighted this word UK resident. Now how will we determine UK resident? You can either be UK resident or non-resident. Alright, so there could be two different ways, two different options. One is UK resident and other one is non-resident. Alright, so you can be UK resident or non-resident, and then we will decide that whether you are resident or not by the way of two different methods. One is automatic method and other one is of course the manual method. Like the car, there are some automatic cars in them, some are the manual cars. Likewise in this here as well. So we will determine if you are UK resident or not with the help of automatic tests first of all. Now what are automatic tests we will see in a minute. So under the automatic test you can either be UK resident or non-resident. Alright, so under the automatic test you can either be UK resident or non-resident. So that was an automatic test. Say for example, if you are under the automatic tests, when we see automatic tests, you are not UK resident, neither you are non-resident. So what if you are in between of those? If you are in between of those, then you will have to apply the second test, which is a manual test, which is known as UK ties test. In that we will have to see that how many ties we have with the UK. Now ties here means connections or the relations. I will just write it down as connections. So how many connections you have with the UK. So the more connections you have with the UK, chances are that you will be considered UK resident. If you have less connection with the UK, if you have less connection with the UK, then chances are you will not be UK resident. So the answer will be non-resident. Alright, so the more connections you have with the UK, chances are you will be considered UK resident. Also, while looking at these UK ties, we will also have to determine how many days we actually spend in the UK. Right? So we also have to determine how many days we actually spend in the UK and how many connections we have with the UK, how many ties we have with the UK. Alright, but this thing will come later. First we have to determine if if we are UK resident or non-resident through the help of automatic tests. We will see the manual test later on, but first we have to determine whether we are UK resident or non-resident with the help of automatic tests. Now let's go to our lecture notes and let's see that how to determine what are those automatic tests. If you come to page number 6 of your lecture notes, page number 6, chapter number 2, it's chapter number 2, residence. Right? Now on top of that, it says a person is liable to UK tax if he is resident in the UK for a given tax year. Of course, it is so obvious. I've listed down on the top as well. Only UK residents will have to pay tax. Now, UK resident means you can be UK resident in tax year 17-18, but you cannot be UK resident in the coming tax year. You might be living somewhere else. You never know. Likewise, in the earlier years as well, you might not be UK resident in the previous year, but you might be UK resident in this year. So whichever year you are UK resident, you will have to pay UK tax in that specific year. Alright, so that's why it says a person is liable to UK tax if he is resident in the UK for a given tax year. To define whether a person is resident in a particular tax year or not, following rules apply. So to determine if we are UK resident or non-resident, first we will see the automatic tests. Right, so first of all it says first automatic non-resident tests. Now there are certain conditions, 3 conditions given below. If any of those conditions apply, then we will be considered as UK non-resident. So if you are non-resident, of course you will not have to pay any UK tax. Alright, so what are those conditions? A person who is in the UK for less than 16 days during a tax year. So if you spend less than 16 days in a tax year, doesn't matter if you have been previously UK resident or not, you will be considered non-resident in current tax year. Regardless of your previous resident status, regardless of whether you were UK resident in the previous tax years or not, if you have spent 16 days in current tax year or less than that, then you will be considered non-resident automatically. Alright, when you are considered non-resident automatically, you do not need to go to the manual tests. Alright, when you are considered non-resident automatically, you do not need to go to the manual tests. Only we have to go to the manual test when under the automatic test we cannot determine our resident status, neither we are non-resident nor we are UK resident, then we need to go to manual test to determine whether we are resident or non-resident. Alright, so these are non-resident tests. So first of all, what was that? If you spend less than 16 days. The second test says that a person who is in the UK for less than 46 days during a tax year and who has not been resident during the 3 previous tax years. Now this time there are 46 days, so there are little more days, but another condition is that you must not be UK resident in the previous 3 tax years. Alright, so if you have not been resident in the previous 3 tax years and you spend 46 days or more than that, 46 or less than that, 46 days or less than that, then you will be considered automatically non-resident. So that was the second condition. Right? So first condition was just the 16 days regardless of your previous tax status, regardless of your previous resident status. The second condition is, second option is that if you have spent 46 days or less than that, and you must not be UK resident in the previous 3 tax years. Alright? The third test says that a person who works full-time overseas, subject to them not being in the UK for more than 90 days during a tax year. So if you work full-time overseas and you spend 90 days or less than that in the UK, then you will be considered automatically non-resident. Alright, so you work full-time overseas and you spend less than 90 days during a tax year, then you will be considered non-UK resident. Alright, so these are the automatic non-resident tests which are given to us. Alright, now the second tests, which are automatic resident tests, now we need to look at the automatic resident tests. Now if any of these conditions apply, which are we going to study now, then you will be considered UK resident. Now if you are considered UK resident, then of course you will have to pay UK tax. If you're not considered if you're considered non-resident, of course you will not have to pay tax. So that's why. What was the reason to study this chapter? Why are we studying? We know how to calculate tax because we have seen in chapter number 1. But the first question arises that who shall pay tax? If I'm living in Canada or if I'm living in Malaysia, will I be subject to UK tax? Of course not. If I'm living in the UK, means I'm UK resident, then I have to pay UK tax. Alright, so that's why we are asking ourselves different questions to determine our residence status. If we are UK resident, yes, you have to pay UK tax. Non-resident, you don't have to pay UK tax. If we cannot determine our residence status with the help of automatic tests, then we have to go to the manual test, which we will see later. All right. So earlier we have seen the non-residents under the automatic tests. Now we are going to see the UK residents under the automatic tests. So what are these tests? Automatic resident tests. Subject to not meeting any of the automatic non-resident tests. So if you haven't met any of the non-resident tests, then you have to look at the automatic resident tests. So what are those? If you have spent 183 days or more than that during a tax year in the UK, then you will be automatically considered as UK resident. The second condition says, or second option says, that a person whose only home is in the UK. So if you have only home in the UK, then again you will be considered as UK resident. And the third test says that a person who carries out full-time work in the UK, that person will also be considered UK resident. All right. So if you fulfill any of these criteria, you will be considered UK resident. Now the question arises that we know that if you spend 46 days or less than that, you will be considered non-resident. If you spend 183 days or more than that, you will be considered UK resident. What if I have spent 100 days? What if I have spent 100 days in the UK? What would happen? Then of course we cannot determine under the automatic test. We cannot determine whether we are resident or non-resident under the automatic test. Then we need to move on to the manual tests. If I have spent 100 days, then we need to go to the manual tests. So if under the automatic test I cannot determine I am non-resident or resident, then I need to go to the manual tests. So what are the manual tests? Let's look at below. So it says UK ties tests. Applied only if the automatic test could not define the residence. So if automatic test does not, automatic tests are not able to define the residence status of an individual, then we need to look at the UK ties. Now UK ties basically are connections with the UK, so which are given below. So it says that where a person's residence status cannot be determined by any of the automatic tests, then his or her status will be based on the how many ties they have with the UK and how many days they stay in the UK during a tax year. So how many ties you have with the UK and how many days have you stayed within the UK. Right? Their active UK ties are as follows. So there are different ties which are considered UK ties. But now what are ties? So there are certain UK connections which HMRC says if you have that connection you will be considered one tie. If you have that connection, that is the second tie. Likewise there are 5 ties. Alright, so out of them 5 ties, you does not need to have all 5 connections. You does not need to have all 5 ties in order to be considered UK resident. You only need to consider, you only need to have some of them depending on how many days you have spent in the UK. Alright, so the more days you spend in the UK, you need less ties in order to be considered UK resident. Alright, I will repeat again. If you have spent more days in the UK, you need less ties, less connections in order to be considered UK resident. Alright, so what are those ties? We will see them ties later, but first look at the table which is given at the end of this page, which tells us that how many days you spend in the UK, then how many ties you need in order to be considered UK resident. Alright, so just pause the video and look at this table if you want. I will just quickly go through it. Alright, if you want the details of it, just pause the video and just read it through, please. Alright, so it says first of all days in the UK, so that's how many days you have spent in the UK. And the second column says that previously resident, so whether you were previously resident or not. So if you are previously resident, then you will need to spend less days in the UK and you need less ties in order to be considered UK resident. Alright, so another last one is not previously resident. So if you haven't been previously resident, then you need more UK ties. and you need to spend more days in the current tax year in order to be considered UK resident. All right. So if you look at the first one, it says less than 16 days. If you have spent less than 16 days, doesn't matter if you are previously resident or not, you will be considered automatically non-resident. We have seen this condition under the automatic non-resident test. If you go back to the top of this page, we have seen under the automatic non-resident test, if you spend less than 16 days, doesn't matter if you are previously resident or not, you will be considered automatically non-resident. You don't have to pay UK tax. Now look at the last one in this list, which says 183 days or more. If you have spent 183 days or more, then you will be considered automatically resident. Doesn't matter if you're previously resident or not. And we have seen that under the automatic UK resident test. You can check on this page when we have seen the automatic UK tests, UK resident test. All right. Now, in between of those two, so like 16 to 45 days, 46 to 90 days, the more the days you have spent in the UK, less ties you need in order to be considered UK resident. Now, say for example, look at 121 days, 121 to 182 days. Now, if you have spent 121 to 182 days and you were not previously resident, then you will need one UK tie or more than that. A resident if you have one UK tie or more than that, and if you are not previously resident, then you need two UK ties, and then you will be considered UK resident. All right. Now this table will be given to you in the exam. That is a good news. So you do not have to memorize this table. However, what you need to memorize is the ties, the connections. So what are them ties, which we are referring to again and again, that you need one tie, you need two ties, or four ties. So what are them ties basically? Let's look at them now. Having a close family member in the UK. So if you have close family member like your wife or your kids, then that is considered one connection, that is considered one tie. Now the second tie is having a house in the UK which is made use of during the tax year. If you have a UK house and you have used that house, that is considered second tie. Doing substantial work in the UK is also considered a UK tie. But what is substantial work? It is given in the brackets 40 days or more, and you have spent at least 3 hours a day. So that will be considered substantial work. Then it says that being in the UK for more than 90 days during either of the previous two tax years, then that is another tie as well. And last one is spending more time in the UK than in any other country. If you spend more time in the UK than in any country in the world, that is another tie. All right. Again, the more days you spend in the UK in current tax year, you need less ties in order to be considered UK resident. You spend less days in the UK, you need more ties in order to be considered UK resident. By the way, there is no benefit of being UK resident. You only have to pay UK tax. All right. So you will have to pay the UK tax if you're UK resident. If you're non-UK resident, then you do not have to pay UK tax. All right, so that's basically end of our chapter number 2. I've listed down here a small example. Basically, it's not small example, sorry, but I would say it's just a small. Anyway, just read it and tell me if it is a small example or not. Just pause the video and try and attempt this example yourself. If you cannot attempt it, then just watch me give you the advice on it. Watch me give you assistance on that. All right, just pause the video and try and have a go at it, please. By the way, if you cannot read it, I will just read out to you anyway. So Mr. A, B and C, they are three friends. Mr. A lives in where? Sorry, Canada. So Mr. A lives in Canada but visits UK every year. In 17-18 tax year, he spent roughly 10 days in the UK. He was UK resident last year and stayed at B's only home in the UK. So who is B? At the top it says A, B and C are friends. So he stayed at B's house in the UK, and it says B's only home in the UK. Then it says that B works full-time overseas. So B is working full-time overseas. And C was previously resident. Now it's the information about the C. All right. So C basically was previously resident in the UK, He was previously resident in the UK. In 1718, he spent how many days? He spent 30 days in the UK. This is the maximum time he spent in any country this year, as his job involved a lot of traveling. He came to visit kids and stayed at his home in the UK. He used to stay over 3 months. He used to stay over 3 months with his kids in all of the previous previous 3 tax years. All right. So just try and have a go at this example. Now the requirement of this example is that tell me who is resident in the UK and who is non-resident as far as UK tax is concerned in the current tax year 1718. So you need to determine if A is resident or non-resident, B is resident or non-resident, likewise for C as well. All right, with the help of chapter number 2. Now if we look at the information about A lives in Canada, so he lives overseas. Whenever it says overseas in the notes, overseas means outside the UK. For this chapter and for overall this paper, just consider yourself present in the UK. So overseas, whenever the word says overseas, it means that outside UK, because you are currently living or staying in the UK. So overseas always means outside UK. So A lives in Canada, which is overseas, but visits UK every year. So he's coming in the UK every year. He comes in the UK every year. In 1718 tax year, he spent roughly 10 days in the UK. He was UK resident last year and stayed at B's only home in the UK. Alright, so he was previously resident and he only spent 10 days in the UK. So he spent less than 16 days in the UK. Doesn't matter he was previously resident or not, he will be considered automatically non-resident. Alright, now read again. A lives in Canada, which means he lives overseas but visits UK every year. In 1718 tax year, he spent 10 days in the UK. So these are clearly less than 16 days. So automatic non-resident test number 1. So if you look at automatic non-resident test number 1, which says if you spend less than 16 days in the UK in any tax year, then you are non-resident. Alright, so A is basically non-resident. Alright, so A is non-resident. Then look at the information about B. So basically B works full-time overseas, but his only home is in the UK. Now let's look at the lecture notes and see if it is UK resident or not. Right, so excuse me. A person who works full-time overseas subject to them not being in the UK for more than 90 days during a tax year. So if someone works full-time overseas, as he says he works full-time overseas, but information is not given to us that how many days he spent in the UK. So we need to look at other automatic test, which is automatic resident test. Now in the automatic resident test, it says a person whose only home is in the UK is considered automatically UK resident. Alright, now as it says B's only home is in the UK, so he will be considered automatic UK resident. Alright, now B although works full-time overseas, as I earlier said, but we do not know that how many days he spent in the UK. So that's why we cannot determine whether he is automatic overseas or not, automatic non-resident or not. But definitely this information is clearly telling us B's only home is in the UK. This information is clearly telling us that B is automatically UK resident. Alright, now let's look at the information about C. C was previously resident in the UK. So C was previously resident in the UK. In tax year 1718 he spent 30 days. Alright, so that is a little technical thing. He spent 30 days in the UK. This is the maximum time he spent in the UK. Now when he spent 30 days in the UK, these are clearly less than 46 days. Alright, now these are less than 46 days. If it is less than 46 days, if you spend less than 46 days and you were not previously resident in any previous 3 tax years, then you will be considered non-resident. However, it says in the question he was previously resident in the UK. Where does it say? So he was previously resident in the UK, so he is not automatically non-resident. He is not. Now we need to consider further tests. Sorry. So he spent 30 days in the UK. This is the maximum time he spent in any country, as his job requires a lot of traveling. Now we know that he is not automatically non-resident, and we need to consider whether he is automatically UK resident or not with the help of further information. And 30 in the UK, and that is the maximum time he spent in any country. As his job requires a lot of traveling, he comes to visit his kids and stayed at his home in the UK. He used to stay over 3 months with his kids in all of the previous 3 tax years. Now, by reading this information about C, I cannot determine whether he is automatically non-resident. Excuse me, whether he is automatically non-resident or whether he is automatically resident. I cannot determine that. When I cannot determine whether he is automatically non-resident or automatically UK resident, then I need to go to the manual tests, which are UK ties test. Alright, now in order to see the UK ties test, I first need to see how many days he spent in the UK. Now it is telling me that he spent 30 days in the UK. Now I need to go to the table that how many days how many ties does he require. If you spend 16 to 45 days in the UK and you are previously resident, then you need how many ties? If you spend 16 to 45 days and you are previously resident in the UK, you need 4 UK ties or more. If you have 4 UK ties or more, then you will be considered UK resident. Now see that if he has got any 4 ties or not. Now what are them ties? Let's look at this information. See, he was previously resident in the UK. In 17-18, he spent 30 days in the UK. This is the maximum time he spent in any country this year. So that is basically a tie. Maximum time spent in any country. Alright, so that is basically 1 tie. Alright, so that is 1 tie. Now just look at UK ties, you will find this information. If you spend more time in the UK than in any other country in the world, that is 1 tie. As his job required a lot of traveling, he came to visit his kids and stayed at his home. Now he came to visit his kids. It is telling me that he has got close family member in the UK. Alright, his kids. Now these are close family member in the UK. So that is another tie, tie number 2. And stayed at his home in the UK. His home in the UK is another tie. That is basically 3rd tie. I only need 1 other tie, another tie. I only need 1 more tie in order to consider him as UK resident. So reading on, he's used to stay over 3 months with his kids in all of the previous 3 tax years. Alright. Now when you spend more than 90 days in the previous 3 tax years, then that is another tie as well. So he spent over 3 months in all of the previous 3 tax years. So that is basically the 4th tie. Alright, so we got 4 ties, and that's why he will be considered UK resident. UK resident. So who is C? C is UK resident under the UK ties tests. Because we have seen the UK ties, we could not consider his resident status with the help of non-resident and resident automatic tests. That's why we went to the manual tests, and with the help of UK ties test, we can now tell that he is UK resident. Alright, now let's look at them ties again on the notes and see if we did it correctly or not. Having a close family member in the UK, yes, he has got 1 close family member because he has got kid. Then having a house in the UK which is made use of. He has the house in the UK and he stayed in the house, so he used that house. That is another tie. Doing substantial work in the UK, he hasn't done so. Being in the UK for more than 90 days in either of the previous 3 tax years. So either the previous 2 tax years, sorry. So he spent 3 months or over 3 months. So he spent more than 3 months in the previous 3 tax years. So that is another tie. And last one, he says that spending more time in the UK in any other country in the tax year, he spent more time in the UK than in any other country because his job requires a lot of traveling. He's a busy man. All right, so C is basically resident but with the help of UK ties. Now if you see this question in the exam like that, you have to tell the examiner that why is A UK resident with the help of automatic resident test. Why? Because he spent that many days. Why B is non-resident? Sorry, in this case A is non-resident but B is not resident. So why is B UK resident? Which test is he fulfilling? Why did you determine that he is UK resident? Likewise for C as well, why is C UK resident? Because we have seen the UK ties test, he spent 30 days, he needs 4 ties, and 4 ties. Which 4 ties is he fulfilling? He spent maximum time in the UK than in any other country. He got close family members. He got UK house which he used, and then he spent more than 90 days in the previous 3 tax years. That's why he's fulfilling the 4 UK ties. He has got the 4 UK ties. That's why he will be considered UK resident. All right, with the help of UK ties. Right, so that was end of our, not was, basically it is. So that is end of our chapter number 2 of UK residence. I will see you in the next chapter, and then we will continue with our income tax journey. Good luck to you, and I will see you then. Goodbye.